Alright everyone, welcome to session 1. I'd like to take this moment for you all to introduce your characters and then we'll get going. I'm Dermir Munnek. I'm Manly Moss Blossom. I am Sally the Kind. Vincent Veilkeep. Well, actually, it's Vincente Valthos. When do we get to the murdering? Alright, so let's get started. So we're gonna set the scene and then you walk into the castle. Suddenly, out of nowhere, you're attacked. Roll for initiative. So, I guess we're rolling up new characters next session. But 1 minute we were. I don't get it. What? Damn, that was one badass god. Hello you wonderful people, I'm Dracthonia and I'm here to help you in your pursuit to your best self, one game at a time! Today we're going to talk about the responsibilities of being a DM and how you can establish trust between you and your players. So before we get into it, just take a moment to like, subscribe and obey to keep up to date with all of our new D&D ventures coming your way. So let's get into it, shall we? Okay, so on this channel we've talked quite a lot about how, as a DM, you want to be establishing a safe environment with your players where you are working as a group to create this story that you are creating together. And we've highlighted that it's not always your responsibility as a DM to do everything on your own. That being said, obviously, as a DM, you do have certain responsibilities. Unfortunately, there are things that you are going to have to consider when you're playing the game. I know, it's terrible. Someone hasn't written it all out for you. It's just a way of things. But we're going to go over a few points that you may wish to consider when you are trying to establish trust between you and your players and making decisions that, well, maybe not specified in the rules, will help you build a game that is not only enjoyable for you and your players, but also isn't so completely unforgiving that you end up with a completely KO'd party within the first session. So, what kind of issues can you expect to come across? One big issue that we're going to talk about is, well, I mean, dice in general. Those shiny, addictive rocks are the bane of our existence. But specifically, dice rolls and fudging dice. That doesn't mean covering dice in fudge, unfortunately. But when we talk about fudging dice, we mean that maybe you roll a certain way and tell everyone else that you rolled a different way. Now, this can be taken in two different scenarios. One could be that you're cheating.
Miguel, if I believed in fate, I wouldn't be playing with loaded dice.
And as a DM and even as a player, you want to be setting a baseline of trust. You know, if you're not playing digitally and you're not playing digitally with it open to everyone seeing, you may be old school and be rolling your own dice, and it is assumed that you are telling everyone the correct number on your dice. But sometimes people are known to fudge them. It happens. When it comes to cheating in terms of fudging dice, there are ways to avoid it. There are ways to make sure that you and your players are being held accountable to how the dice rolls, so that it keeps it fair for everyone involved. But at the end of the day, the only person who's really losing out is you as a person for making your dice roll a certain way. The beauty of a game that is down to probability and chance is that you are not always entirely in control of the outcome, and you need to adapt to whatever situation is thrown your way. That being said, on the other side of things, as a DM especially, fudging dice may sometimes be needed. Now hear me out. Sometimes your party is on its last legs, and you may or may not have overestimated their capabilities of dealing with that high-level monster.
Grr.
And you then end up rolling like 3 criticals against the last one standing. And maybe it's not so fun for everyone involved if the entire party get KO'd. I mean, if you've discussed this with your party, if they knew that it was a big risk and they were all for it, they would like, no, hold us to it. If we all die and that's the end of the game, that's just how the cookie crumbles. Cookies. But at the same time, sometimes things go a bit awry. Maybe you forgot to lower the specs of that monster that you thought would be thrown in just for a bit of extra spiciness, and didn't stay up until 3 a.m. respecking it, and it's doing a bit more damage than you expected against your level 1 party. And that's totally understandable. There is a reason that there's a DM screen, and sometimes you maybe need to tweak your rolls, okay? And that, I feel, and from what I gather, a lot of people feel is entirely okay. Because you're not sticking so rigidly to a rule set just for the sake of sticking to the rules. You are adjusting things as needed to make sure that everyone still is, well, in the game to have fun. If you don't have a party alive, you don't have a game. So sometimes these calls need to be made. Now, that being said, that doesn't invite you to change all of your dice rolls just to suit your whims. You are still part of the game. You are still playing the game yourself as a DM. And your players are trusting that you are going to be rolling to your truest capabilities. Now, as I said, if you're playing online with your dice rolls open to everyone, then this does hold you all accountable to how the dice roll. But it's something to consider. That being said, you could always discuss this with your party, see if they are open to you making a call in terms of how your dice actually decide very key points of your games. As the DM, you get to have that final call. It is your game. There's always the option to be open and honest with your group after a session that maybe you had to be a little bit more lenient with some of your roles. And that will invite trust and respect into your group. Now, something that we say quite a lot on this channel is that you don't have to know all of the rules all of the time. It's okay. You are but a human being. Unless you have a photographic, perfect recollection kind of memory.
Photographic is a misnomer. I have an eidetic memory, as I've told you many times. Most recently, last year during lunch on the afternoon of May 7th.
You cannot be expected to always know the rules off the top of your head, unless you've been doing it for years and years and years. And even then, rule sets change, you add tweaks, maybe you've got homebrew content. It's entirely okay to not know the answer to a specific rule check, a debate of differing opinion when it comes to how something should go, and it's all down to interpretation at the same time. Now, that being said, you know, obviously as the DM, you're the one that's supposed to be interpreting the rules, you're the one that's supposed to be helping your players through the system so that they can enjoy the story that they are telling and achieve the things that they wish to achieve. But that doesn't mean that you can't have one player in particular that's dedicated to rule checks. Now, rule checks can be rather jarring in the middle of a game. It can bring your story to a standstill. It can just disrupt that immersion. But if one player is happy to oversee those rule checks, those making sure that those decisions were made correctly, or if in future that decision comes up, then you can have someone who's dedicated to looking up those pieces of information for you. And it doesn't have to be the DM. I know, strange and unusual concept, but it doesn't have to be the DM. It will help the DM maintain the entire game as a whole and the group's progress together if they are not having to constantly stop the game to check rules or to do like obscure situational rule checks to make sure something's accurate. And it also means that players can trust that there is one person that will be overseeing that during your entire playthrough. That being said, obviously, lots of DMs are very particular about their rules and how they wish to interpret them and how they wish to play the game. They are the game masters. They are the ones controlling how their world and the various scenarios play out. And so maybe they have different rules that they wish to apply to certain things. Entirely okay to discuss these options and to talk about how your interpretations are going to be made. So it's entirely okay to take time during your game to make sure that any rule debates are resolved between parties so that for future reference, you all know where you stand with those situations. Now, something to consider as a DM when creating a game and playing with a group of very different people. Maybe they're longtime friends, maybe they're entirely new players in your campaign. But as a DM, it's important to consider when things are taken too far. This could be in terms of whether or not you're pushing a joke too far, whether or not you are violating someone's boundaries a bit too much. There are various situations that maybe you should keep in mind when playing a game. Obviously, this is the case throughout life. You can't predict everything or how every situation is going to turn out. Sometimes you're going to cross boundaries without realizing it. Sometimes you're going to trigger people. You cannot predict everything and how it's going to turn out. But one way of dealing with this is to establish a routine of checking in and doing some after-game self-care.
I'm just a big toasty cinnamon bun.
Now, if you've crossed someone's boundary and it's really bad, they're going to let you know. They're going to let you know. But to establish that respect and trust between you and your players, you really should have a chance outside of your allocated game time to discuss how things made people feel. Maybe there was something that came up during that game session that was particularly upsetting, or maybe your players have told you something and you have forgotten, but you then put something triggering in their game. Establishing this time outside of game time allows you to discuss what is okay during a game and what isn't. If something comes up, as it quite often will do, you get the opportunity to talk it through while it's fresh in your minds and is tackled soon and respectfully addressed, so that grudges aren't held against each other, that these things build up so that you end up with multiple issues down the line and the game falling apart because you haven't discussed it. Now, obviously, boundaries are different for each person. You have session 0, which you can check out a video up here if you haven't seen it. But session 0 is for establishing those immediate known triggers. But things can come up. Things can change from day to day. You don't know. People may go through various different issues at different times and may find something particularly triggering one session and not in another. So it's important to have these little check-in points where you get to have these discussions, get to evaluate how the game went, what can be improved, and how you can better serve each other as people. It also gives you an opportunity to reassure your DM. Like, your DM puts in a lot of effort. They are constantly trying to micromanage every single aspect of the game, and they're constantly trying to make sure that their players are having a good time. These check-in opportunities give you the chance to tell your DM what worked well, what didn't. It allows you to just reassure each other and maintain a good and healthy environment for your games. Things that you may wish to discuss that aren't even trigger points is things like, are your players comfortable with the plot hook that you've given them? Are they wishing to be the leader of their group, or are they actually much prefer to be a support character? Giving each other space to express yourselves about how the game's going and how you feel about certain situations just helps you maintain a healthy environment for the future of your campaign. Going back to that whole how dice tend to have that funny way of screwing you when you least want it to.
Oh my.
Sometimes things go remarkably well. Your players just wipe the absolute floor with everything that you throw at it that one session. They're all getting crits. Something, somewhere, some dice god is shining upon your party. Yes, sometimes imbalances happen. Sometimes you overpower monsters, sometimes you underpower things. It's understandable. But that does not mean that you should punish your players for luck. Celebrate it with your players. At the end of the day, you should be enjoying your players' success, not trying to seek their failure. For a game to be enjoyable for everyone involved, really, you're all working together for the most enjoyable outcome. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be happy-go-lucky, shiny rainbows and such forth. It just means that you are collectively working towards something satisfying together, which means that you shouldn't really be punishing your players for things going their way for once. How many games have we been in where shit just hits the fan? Like, it just goes all out chaos. And there's nothing that you can do. In those situations, if you're happy to fudge dice, why would you not be happy when things go remarkably well? This doesn't necessarily mean that your game is unbalanced, Stephen. That just means that today the dice gods were friendly. And that is honestly a good session. Often we talk about how players can metagame and how that can make it not so enjoyable for the DM and also for the other players. But we very rarely talk about how DMs can also metagame when playing particular NPCs. It's very easy for a DM to metagame their villain. But really, to establish a good story and to hold you and your players to the same standards, you should be thinking about how much of this information your villain knows and how much you as the DM know. This is particularly evident when your players find out something that may help them save the world, or whatever they're doing, but then somehow the villain knows it as well, when the villain wasn't there. Or you as the DM maybe change story elements to adapt to the fact that your players have found this wonderful option or thought outside of the box. Now, why would your villain know this?
How did we, Kronk?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
You've got to either have a really good reason why they know this information, or play the game as though the villain does not know this information, and let things play their course. And this, while more of a long-term end goal with your group, will establish a rapport and trust between you and your players, because they don't feel like you're metagaming, but they can't. Last but not least, as a DM, the most important thing to establish trust with your players and in terms of your responsibility, you've got to remember what is also not your responsibility. It is not your responsibility to make everyone have fun. You just have to make sure that you're providing the space for everyone to have fun. There is a unique difference. You can't make fun mandatory. People will enjoy the game as they enjoy the game. If they are not enjoying the game, then maybe you can put in some things that will help. But at the end of the day, that is up to them. You as the DM are just there creating the space for that opportunity. So don't put so much pressure on yourself. Okay, I hope some of that information was helpful. If you have any points that you think I've missed, put them down in the comments below. Let me know your opinions. And as always, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope you have a good month, and I will see you all soon. Say bye all! Thanks to our Ko-Fi members for supporting the channel and allowing us to do this kind of stuff outside of streaming. And maybe you want to hang around and check out one of these lovely videos that's just popped up on your screen. Yeah. That did not go according to plan.